Hi, my name is David Bradley, aka Schizophrenic, and today I will discuss with you why I believe there may be non-physical beings and alternate universes that we can access. The video's title is loosely Angels and Aliens, Non-Physical Beings and Alternate Universes. Let's dive right on in. So before we go into the video, I just want to apologise for the fact that I have not made any more content. I didn't expect this channel to do particularly well. We're one sub, if anyone wants to like and subscribe, share that with anyone that might find it useful. That's one sub away from 800, and my watch hours are like pretty significant. So thank you all that have watched so far, and thank you for those of you that continue to watch and comment and like and leave comments on these videos. I find it fascinating that people have got any interest in what I have to say, let alone so much. So thank you all sincerely for that. I thought I was going to die. Basically, I thought I had esophageal cancer. We've cleared that up now with an endoscopy. I'm still getting some bleeding from my esophagus, but it's mostly died down. And I think there's a surgery I can have that will improve that and various things like that. But that's why I sort of went AWOL, because I had a lot on my mind, and I was sort of preparing for death psychologically in the background of my mind, and now I've added like an extra 40 years or odd, some significant percentage more years of my life, because in my head I thought I had esophageal cancer, which is like a death sentence, basically. You get it. This is what got Christopher Hitchens. Sorry I've not been making any more content, and the last few videos I put up were actually reposts of videos I'd already put up as freeform poetry years ago, but then I unlisted them and then added some music just to keep something coming up on the channel, but I realised it's not exactly on brand for what drew people in. So thank you for those of you that have watched that. It's not got zero response, but yeah, back to some more talking head kind of explanations and theories about the universe content. So with that said and out of the way, let's go into the preface of this video. So the preface, loosely speaking, is going to be an explanation of how I think what happens, and then I'll explain what I experienced and how that ties in with it. So it kind of starts with, I was having a conversation about mysticism and psychology, as I so often do with people, with a friend of mine that's a doctor of physics. Now, he was trying to explain to me some physics principles, because I said I didn't quite get quantum physics. It's one of his fields, blah blah blah. Point was, he was explaining to me like some principle of quantum mechanics, and the idea was that, like, I'm going to butcher this, so be patient with me. Not a physicist, literally just a mentally ill person on the internet. But he said that similarly to as discussed in previous videos, quantum particles exist in superposition potentially, or even basically every atom has a number or sequence of electrons going around it, and the fact that that is visible and observable in the universe, one theory behind that is that it's because that's in phase, and that there may be alternate out of phase electrons happening, and that this could explain why the electron only seems to manifest when observed. I think that's loosely it, but the gist is that as he was explaining this to me, I'm thinking like of a whole bunch of stuff. Like you'll see in Devils and Deities from the Mind of a Mystic podcast. There's some audiobook just only podcasts, which is just like further back in the channel history. Go and like, subscribe, share that shit. Look for it further back on the channel, where I talk about non-physical entities. And one of the things that made me think is, like, if you've ever come across the concept of the shadow people, right? So like when people get really, really strung out and they start dreaming while they're awake, loosely speaking, there's like people see entities just in the periphery, or they start to hallucinate real physical entities, largely to do with sleep deprivation. But also, I mean, we could go into a whole bunch of stuff about DMT and literally physically exiting this reality, and like the recent, I forget what they call it, extended state DMT studies, where they found people So I think it's via IV, and they bring in up to an hour of sustained in IV of DMT, and they're starting to map stuff out. And then previously in that research, I forget where, I think it wasn't John Hopkins, but it was might have been John Hopkins, it was some British university. They were studying, because DMT is in the body with as much bioavailability as like serotonin and dopamine and other neurotransmitters. And one of the things that was inferred by their research, but they haven't yet got anything solid on that. This is a while since I've checked in. But one of the things inferred is that DMT in the body, brain, mind mediates your experience of reality itself. So that would explain why when turned up to 11, you go into a hyper-real alternate reality, like biochemically. But one of the things that, to lead back to my point, one of the things I thought about with this, like, out-of-phase electrons, is that if it's possible to have in-phase electrons that then infer atomic structure, that then infer molecular structure, well, you go all the way up the chain to physical matter, which we know is mostly empty space anyway, just from traditional physics. Like, is it possible that our universe, the physical universe, is one of the spectrum within the multiverse that exists at different phase points? And if that is the case, and we can see that they have these phenomenologically separate, distinct versions of reality that can be accessed purely by altering the chemical and electromagnetic resonance of the brain. You know, I talked about dreams before in the videos, but by altering the electrochemical, the electromagnetic and biological, neuropharmacological resonance of the brain, you can experience objectively different realities. Is it possible that those objectively different realities exist in the same physical space and they're mediated by consciousness? Which is what it leads me to think, to some degree, at least as a potential aspect of the universe, because it would explain a lot of things that I've experienced, which I've gone over in that previous podcast, but I'm going to elucidate a little bit more on right now. So, as discussed in many of my previous videos, and probably by a lot of people on Aeroid, like, there is a massive body of anecdotal sources of people experiencing non-physical beings. I had a chat with a random lady, which I will not elaborate on any further, but she said she saw reptiles a lot on high-state mushroom trips and DMT trips. There's a whole bunch of different, lore here that is involved in these non-physical entities, and, a large part of my understanding of it comes from the fact that since I was about 5 years old, and then got massively exaggerated in my teens, and then even more explosively detectable non-physical entities came into my life in my early 20s, and then I spent, nearly 40, so I spent 20 to 35 years trying to make sense of all of this. If I don't take my medication, for example, for an extended period of time, or even, depending on what's going on in my life, even 24 hours, that alters my neuropharmacology, essentially. So, when I first got put on medication, it was because I was seeing non-physical entities anyway, and then as the medication took over, they became less objective and more voice-like, more apparitional, more at the fringes of my consciousness, until, as now, I'm not constantly pestered by alien and foreign entities from God knows what level of consciousness. But if I lower my medication through, let's say, as has happened before, the pharmacy can't get them in, and I have to take a significant reduced amount, or even zero, aripiprazole, which is what I'm on, which is, by the way, if you have schizophrenia, probably the best antipsychotic you could or should try, in my personal opinion, because literally all the others have horrible side effects. What was I saying though? The point is, when my neurotransmitters go up, because that's basically what's happening, you get withdrawal from the medication, and what was previously a very small bandwidth of regulation, which is dopamine reuptake inhibition, dopamine inhibition, small bandwidth, inhibition of the prefrontal cortex, chemical lobotomy is one way of putting it. But as those things invert and become more active because they're not being regulated by the medication, it'd be like dreaming whilst awake, but there's consistent beings and characters that I interact with as a virtue of 35-year history of interacting with non-physical beings, plus then where the meds how do I put it, as they are dropping out of my system, I get an uptick again in seeing these non-physical entities. The reason I preface the video with the physical properties is like, it's not entirely self-evident to me, even after all these years, even after going into a deep period of stability, that these beings aren't real. But then again, I am schizophrenic, diagnosed, so of course, like, I'm gonna think that. But there's plenty of people that aren't diagnosed with schizophrenia that also hold these opinions and that have these experiences and that see things this way. And so a big part of my progress as a person is distinguishing between, like, what is a psychosomatic auditory hallucination or sensory tactile hallucination purely generated by damage to the corpus callosum, which is a central connecting bridge between hemispheres, or hallucinations through whatever chemical induction, whatever, and then what is objectively like a recurrent phenomenon of reality. And the problem I have, which is probably why I'm still diagnosed with schizophrenia, is that I can't seem to find... It's very hard to separate something that you've been let me give you an example. Say you had a friend, an imaginary friend, right? Hypothetically. You had an imaginary friend as a child. What was his name? Drop Dead Fred. So that movie, great movie, get what it's like. You have a non-real interaction with someone that seemingly to everyone else doesn't exist. Then you get older and it stops being a childhood imaginary friend and starts being like, wait, like, this thing is doing stuff, like in Drop Dead Fred, right? This thing is having what you thought was just in your head, an imaginary character, seems to objectively influence the outcomes, sometimes radically, in the external world. And then, so imagine that, but there's like 9 of them, like, which is the peak of my experience there was 9 distinct entities that I was interacting with, and then it started spiraling out of control, which is why I upregulated the medication to trying to drive them out. But the point is like, it seems feasible to me that the consistency of the hallucinations, like I said, to argue the alternate point, it's like reality is an illusion, albeit a persistent one. It's like the inverse of that is that I've had enough experiences of people that seem to have the same psychospiritual cognitive structures as me, and they interact with non-physical beings. Now, is every single one of those people just got a broken brain? And if you do the math on it, it's like, so, what would it be? People that hallucinate, hear voices, have some sort of psychotic or schizophrenic style disorder is 1 in 10, I believe, was the last time I looked at 1 in 10. So, like, of 10 people, 10 people, could be 1 in 100. Even if it's 1 in 100, you're looking at like 700 million people on the planet that have the same neuropharmacological, psychological, or neurological disorder that lead to them seeing non-physical beings. And I've found time and time again that through the mental health service, or just dealing with people at festivals, like, do you know what I mean, or like even reaching out on social media and stuff, that it's not apparent to me, especially one-on-one dealing with other schizophrenics, when I have a hallucination of energy movement or words coming into my mind, like through thought broadcasting, and you see a physical reaction in the other schizophrenic, as though they've observed the same phenomena. 700 million people, and it's like I've always found it arrogant that I'm making this is like again more preface really, but I'm making the argument that like it's like in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. Like, do you know what I mean? It's like, but in I wrote a short story about that. But yeah, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is insane. Like, and I however it comes about, whether it's a neuropharmacological alteration of consciousness, it alters the frequency of your perception, therefore you start seeing other beings in alternate realities that could be out of phase. And it's like, hemispherically, the majority of people live in the prefrontal cortex, the left hemisphere, they're right-handed, they have fully intact corpus callosum, they have lower reactivity in the amygdala, they have different brains, essentially. They have different brains. And the possibility of non-physical beings being objective to 1 in 10, 1 in 100, of getting up for like 8, probably going to get up to the 10 billion capacity in the next decade, depending on the birth rate, whatever. That's a peripheral thing, but it's just like, there's just an enormous amount of people on the planet that are being told by people that don't, this hubris involved in this, but I'm trying to say it not like this, but like, when I interact with other people of my ilk, we all loosely have shared hallucinations, loosely speaking. Like, the motion in the corner of the eye is reacted to by both, but explained differently, like a different lens. Same way in like, like you put a Christian on mushrooms, they're more likely to see Jesus, but a Buddhist is more likely to see the Buddha, but they're all having the similar phenomena of interacting with a non-physical deity. If that happens to them, that it'll be interpreted through different lenses. Like, there's loads of anecdotal data of mushrooms reinforcing people's Christianity instead of diffusing it. And the point I'm making is that I think basically there's such a thing as non-physical beings as an objective fact, and that the people telling us that they don't exist are the people that don't see them. So how can their input be valid on a sense that they don't have? Right? How can someone that doesn't know something, doesn't have any data or evidence for it, holding a bottle of pills, deal with your hallucinations anyway, other than assuming that there's something wrong with you because they've never had them, And it's not something to breed resentment. It's just like, you can't make sense of something you've never experienced. So I'm gonna pause there and be right back. So just to cement that concept a bit more rationally, so it's getting a bit. It's a deeply frustrating thing for me, but basically I'm trying to put forward the idea that, like, this particular brand of neurodivergence, like, so that's psychotic or hallucinatory or data, or basically perceiving things that aren't real, similarly, Right, I'll give you an example. I was raised Christian, Roman Catholic, went through First Holy Communion, blah, 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 blah. My story involves that character there. That's specifically the Gnostic Christ for good reason as well, because I'm not a fan of the church as a point of principle, but I've seen the Buddha and the Trimurti and Krishna and Shiva, specifically Shiva, a bunch. Like one time I was in a forest with my eyes closed, floating off in the distance, and this is I'll put the further back on my channel is a podcast, 4 episodes. It's on Spotify as well. It'll be linked in the description. But I saw like a DMT level emanating from infinite void of blackness, Hindu god watching over me, nodding in the sort of floating lotus position, coming out of deep space. And what I'm saying is, like, it almost, the social and cultural conditioning doesn't matter. What it is like you're interacting with something non-physical. And so, like, for, I don't know, a devout fundamentalist Christian or a devout cultural Christian to see Shiva, that's anomalous. Oddly, you would expect, if it was pure conditioning of the culture that then creates the medium through which you hallucinate this character that then does appear to act in reality, you would expect that I would have seen Jesus floating there, not something that looked like a dark-skinned Shiva, like a coming out of infinite light. The other factor there that's interesting is, like, is it at least possible that these non-physical entities might appear to people for whom which were more likely to see them, and, you know, I'll use a joke, for example, that I said, like if I, you know, like, let me pause, hold on. Would it be, if you were to die now and there was an afterlife or some sort of intermediary phase in existence, I happen to believe there may be. I've seen waking state evidence of that existing, but I'm not, make your own conclusions on that. But of all the people you might come to see you, like, so let's say you're a disembodied spirit, or you're wandering out of phase with reality, looking for anyone that might be able to see you. Would you choose your militant atheist, beer drinking, ordinary waking state of consciousness, non-psychedelic office worker friend? No, because I'll probably just get therapy and shut it down. Or would you choose the person that might actually have a chance of seeing you because in your own life you knew they had those experiences? Yeah. So even if you take away the death factor and the human factor there, it's like, of these beings here pictured on this, I'll go get it. Right, so I've interacted with every single one of these beings on trips and hallucinations. So, with the exception of Vishnu, I'm yet to see Vishnu. Maybe that'll happen later in life, but I've stopped taking psychedelics. So, Krishna appeared basically as an orb of infinite pink light, guiding me through the equivalent of time travel back into the past to heal traumas. Shiva, as mentioned. Brahma, it's like a hand on the shoulder, but Brahma and Vishnu, I haven't had any significant visual hallucinations of them. Christ, I've seen pouring pearls of light about that big into my body on mushrooms. The Buddha, I had a full-on out-of-body journey where where I prayed to him for the first time I'd ever even, because I studied the Buddha relentlessly in terms of meditation techniques, but I always just thought it was just that, like a technique. But yeah, the Buddha interacted with on multiple trips as a non-physical entity, fully present when I entered alternate reality, stuff like that. And what I'm driving at is that if you were a deity, or the opposite, who would you most likely appear to? People that would take you as an existent being, or someone that not only doesn't have that thinness of the veil for their psyche, but that is actively opposed to the idea you exist at all, and would justify, rationalise, explain it away as nothing anyway, even if you appeared to them. So let me gather my thoughts and I'll be back. Trying to control the embarrassment, but still pushing through the explanation nonetheless. So what I'm driving at is cultural conditioning towards entities is one thing, but I'm not a lip service logician, I read it in the Bible therefore kind of person. I reserve the right to not discuss any of my opinions on the Bible any further, but yeah, I'm basically right. If you there's this Mike Tyson quote that explains it quite nicely, which was like, he was talking to a boxer. He's talking to a boxer about, basically said, don't forget who you came here with. It's like, when you're up and on the peak of success, it's God that brought you there. But that's also, basically, it's like, there's also the time when the devil is most focused on you. Because, let me gather my thoughts. Right. The devil makes work for idle hands. This is a saying for a reason. We've done the equivalent of crucify our sages and say seers are, the West has a lot to answer for. Basically, like to quote Terence McKenna, is like, the mystic swims where the schizophrenic drowns, and the schizophrenic, feeling that's horrible thing. Whereas the shaman has like tens of thousands of years of cultural history, spiritual explanations for everything, like a phenomenology of mind, or a theory of mind that doesn't preclude the idea of non-physical beings because of Western imperialists. I don't know. But just like psychiatry doesn't have all the answers. Like, do you know what I mean? And it's the blind leading the blind. That's what I'm driving at. I just wanted to finish up that point. And like, I don't know. I think, I've had 35 years of experiences that have yet to find a satisfactory, sufficient explanation that would justify me having those experiences so consistently that the non-human entities I've interacted with they're not just air and fluff and imaginary friends. Like, it's like it's quite apparent when you interact with them that not only are they of power of some kind, but that you need to be extremely careful with them, like, because they're not imaginary. It's not even it's not even Jungian active imagination. It's like something's there. Something really is there, and it's not to be messed with, And if you're really Christian, you can be like, no, demons. I say, fuck away from demons. And it's like fucking like every religion on the planet, including like Buddhism as well, with Mahayana Buddhism, and they've got these removed deities, these removed ascended masters that you're not allowed, that are heretical almost in Buddhism to worship, because they're pictured as like dragon-headed, flame-enshrouded Buddhas and stuff. It's like Jainism. You've got, basically, search your religion, you'll find demons everywhere in it. Doesn't matter what your religion is, unless it's atheism. Then even then, you'll see the effects of psychological disturbance in people that are labelled differently by other cultures. But yeah, demons seem to be an evident factor. Don't fuck with them. And as a course of recognising that and discovering that and having these intermediary interactions with horrific stuff when I thought I was in hell, I also discovered, if you do it just right, that the opposite entities exist, and they're non-transactional, and I wouldn't say it if I didn't believe it to be true, that there is, if there can be predatory non-physical entities that harm you, there can be protective non-physical entities that help you. And it could be something as simple as, on one occasion, for example, I felt a hand on my shoulder, but I looked around, there was no one there, and it said stop, and then I realised the car just went straight past me. I linked in a previous video Alex Gray talking about angels and demons in relationship to artwork and to hearing voices. And I don't know, for me, I think at this point in human evolution, we've got so much anecdotal data out there now that it is insufficient. Intellectually, it's insufficient to dismiss, similarly to, near-death experiences, all that sort of stuff. Is like it is statistically significant, the number of people that are capable of seeing non-physical entities in a variety of states for a variety of reasons across a variety of cultures, and that I happen to think more explanation is needed, because the current, your brain's broken, that's why you're friends with Shiva, or you're brainwashed by a culture you didn't grow up in, have zero interest in, rarely had any depictions or studies of, or even seen that creature before. It just doesn't wash. Like I'm and is the blind leading the blind? And like we're doing the spiritual equivalent of like imprisoning, breaking, torturing. I think if I look up, where's the browser? The very first introduction of the word schizophrenia. Where did the term schizophrenia come from? You can Google this yourself. That's funny, it came up with Karen. It was coined by a Swiss psychiatrist, Eugen Bleuler, comes from the Greek word schizein, to split, and phrenia, mind, to describe a loosening of thought processes rather than split personality. It was first used in 1908. So, like, if you just even spend half an hour Googling things that have happened and what diagnostic criteria there were for these things, and that's, so 1908, so we're looking 130 years, is that right? Math, brain. Yeah, like at least 100 years of chemical experimentation, surgeries on the brain, electroshock therapy, all this sort of stuff, which is all pre-dependent. It's all predetermined by the presumptions about reality possessed by people with the scalpels and the pills, and how much trouble you cause in society. Like, I don't put much stock in that. So again, I'm going to gather my thoughts and then I'll be back. So, I'm not refuting the existence of schizophrenia. What I'm refuting is the interpretation of it. Now, I, of all people in the world, take my medication for a reason. I know it's, how do you put it? The distortion of reality around you when you're seeing these hallucinatory figures, which, like, I'm lucky in a lot of ways, and I said this in previous videos, because I am religious. Basically, that's sort of given me pause for thought and a capacity to question reality and to realise these things could be non-physical at all, like, and that they all are, like, and like a big part of me stabilising as a person was going, oh, these are spirits, rather than the opposite, which is this is a broken brain. Because the fact that the innumerable times I've had basically pat tested on reality the knowledge base of these beings, and they seem to contain sources of data that I couldn't possibly know, or like a much wider sphere of information than I could ever possibly interact with or know in my individual psyche. And like, I've had channeling experiences where I just said what they're saying to me and they've seemed to be deeply profound. I've interacted with them using tarot as a medium. I've had all these weird sort of spiritual phenomena, but at no point did I think the CIA put a chip in my brain to monitor my thoughts and control what I think, because it was on to some amazing phenomenon. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, so I think that in that way I'm quite lucky. Other people aren't so lucky, you know. I don't doubt. I also don't doubt that this internal struggle with these beings and the implications of, were my hallucinations to be real, or any variable of that, like any variation, even some percentile of my hallucinations being real, would alienate me from society. I think that it would. I think that it would. It would definitely would. I think. But further, I think that, you know, that it's possibly the blind leading the sighted in that scenario. And I'm beginning, I think, again, to doubt my assumptions about things. Like, I don't know for certain that what I'm seeing has ever been real. I can't say that with any certainty, but like no scientist would, if you know what I mean. No logical person would assume that what they saw would be real unless other people could cross-correlate that information. I've had loads of cross-correlations of information. I've been to alternate realities, I've had visions, I've had hallucinations, I've seen the equivalent of recurrent dream characters in the waking state. So, it's not apparent to me, personally, that these things are just imaginary. And in fact, the more you take away that word imaginary as a point of explanation, it's like no one would will the most terrifying experiences known to psychiatry into their own psyche through willful and active imagination. You know, we have ancestral memory of like a lot of children. My own son, and hundreds of thousands of anecdotal data of like being chased by a big teeth monster as a child, an embodiment of ancestral memory. And there's new studies into stuff like that as well. But I need to put a pin in it there. I think there might be a part 2 to this. Might be a part 2. I need to watch through. Might extend this video, or I might just put it in a part 2. But to finish up, for now, please get at me in the comments, because I'm not entirely sure how coherent this was. But any of your own experiences of non-physical beings and how you interacted with them, or hallucinations you've had that seemed to be able to interact with reality, because that is the mind-boggling thing about non-physical entities, is I can pray or talk to a non-physical humanoid visible entity for an outcome that then seems to happen law of attraction style, but then I can actually see them go in and act that thing, and it's like it's just astonishing when you've experienced it. It's as if you're interacting with a literal non-physical being with the power to alter reality, and the qualia of your interaction with them, and that their own persona, like that they have a persona, you know, it's magical with a K. It's magical. It's astonishing. And I don't know if anyone that's ever said to me that that's not real has had any good points about why. And I've had a bunch of people now throughout my life where my hallucinations, so let's just frame it with that as a final closing statement. When I see energy doing stuff in the environment, it seems to hold intelligence and interact with the physical world as though it's just as significant as what's physically happening and alters the outcome of reality. I'm going to leave it there, pin that for now. Get at me in the comments. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, share the video with anyone that finds it interesting. Probably going to do a part 2. Sorry I've been so long. I thought I was going to die. Now I'm not. At least not yet. So I apologise for my lack of presence online. I hope you found this interesting. It was coherent in any way useful to you. Yeah, like, share. Get at me in the comments. I'd love to know what you think of this. Thanks for watching. Peace.